Hey everyone, thanks for the invitation to be here. And I have to apologize because I thought we were having a sit-down intimate meeting just to discuss whatever your concerns were. So I don't think I realized it was this formal. I'm very impressed to see all of you here, and I'm really grateful that you spent the time to come to DC to talk about ocean and coastal issues. Thank you for doing that. I think I remember my first attendance at the Blue Visions conference about 8 or 9 years ago, and at the time it was during the Bush administration, and yet they had pulled off some surprisingly impressive accomplishments in terms of the largest national marine monument in the world. But I remember that the flavor of the day then, I think, was we were pushing them to move forward to ratify the Law of the Sea Treaty, and it occurs to me 8 years later, I guess we're still hoping that that will happen sometime soon. So thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing to push issues that that obviously we care very much about. And I think my role is just to talk to you a little bit about what the Commerce Committee is and what it does. Is that right? And fill in that part of your...
And feel free, I think the open dialogue thing you talked about, we would really enjoy that.
Okay,
so,
great.
Yeah,
so,
whenever you want to hop into that mode, it's great.
So if I could get a show of hands, how many... What is the #1 priority that you're talking about today? Is it national ocean policy, generally? It's a good one, important. Can I ask of just some other issues that you care about? So Mike mentioned harmful algal blooms. Is there anyone here who has had a harmful algal bloom issue, or you plan to talk about it? There's no good or bad, just curious.
Plastic bags.
Plastic bags. Marine debris?
We have a range of issues, but the national ocean policy getting support for, and in the Senate, Senator Whitehouse was with us the last few days. He's just established a Senate Ocean
Familiar?
Right, Counter Caucus. We like our senators to join that.
Great.
Of course, Law of the Seas is not just ripe fruit at this point. It's kind of rotting on the ground. We'd like them to actually pass that.
Absolutely.
And he's also introduced on the House side, it's the Ocean Trust Fund. On the Senate, it's
familiar with those. Well, in part, my interest in asking why Gulf restoration. Perfect one. Great. Any other big issues that you want to raise? Whaling. Oh, good one. Ocean acidification.
Just getting support co-sponsored Clean Ocean Zone legislation.
Clean Ocean Zone. Oh, nice. So, absolutely. It's good to see you again. How are you? Every one of these are issues that our members are currently grappling with. And so in part, I encourage you just to start your meeting by trying to get to know a little bit about the staffer that you're meeting with. If it's someone you haven't met before, just ask, what brought them to work for that particular congressman or senator? Oh, you do? Okay. Good luck.
And just as general information, all Senate staffers don't mistake me. They don't all look like that for GQ, only about 80%.
Find out sort of what your member cares about. I think that was perfect advice from Mike, is just learn a little bit about what their interests are, and that's going to really be where you've got the opportunity to play. Like at the end of the meeting, if they remember you, having had a good conversation with you, you can always follow up, and you can always seek to build a relationship whereby in the future, like if you see some news article and it just strikes you as like, Congress should do something about that, you'll have started a little bit of a relationship with that staffer. And I mean, staffers are nothing if not responsive on email versus the phone. So even just a simple email where you just point out saying, if you had taken this particular action, it would really help in a situation like this. So just taking a couple of the top level issues, you mentioned marine debris. Senator Inouye on our committee is expecting to introduce a bill actually in the next week or two to reauthorize the Marine Debris Prevention and Research Act, and I'm getting, of course, all the words wrong in the title. We've worked with him on the bill. So that might be another thought, is just mention marine debris. Feel comfortable doing that, ask people to consider the issue, and look for a bill in the next week or two. He actually hasn't yet introduced it, so you'll be right on the prime cusp of it. We just gave it to Legislative Council on Friday last weekend, and I think it'll probably happen in the next week or two, so we're just soliciting co-sponsors. Senator Snowe in the past has been a good co-sponsor, so we're hoping to have her again. Oil spill legislation, that actually is an area that's front and center on our staff radars right now. We're hoping to actually be introducing a revision of our earlier sort of package to deal with sort of both Gulf restoration, broader liability issues. Chairman Rockefeller believes very strongly in the continued need to make the Gulf whole, recognizes that the disaster that happened will not be remedied. It has maybe left the news from a daily perspective, but we think it's going to be a 20 to 30-year recovery. And so he's in it for the long term. We hope this year to be able to pass legislation through our committee in a fairly bipartisan manner. It's looking like we will probably introduce the bill likely the first week of June, and then we'll try to put it on a committee markup as soon thereafter as we can. We'll be obviously having to match probably that legislation with others in the Senate, but we've already sat down also with our House counterparts just to find a sense of, in a pretty partisan environment, what do we think we can agree on? Where can we focus? What do members really need? So I really think that actually oil spill legislation has a shot in a time of challenging environment. National ocean policy as well. As you know, Senator Whitehouse has introduced a bill on that. Senator Snowe is again a co-sponsor, as is my boss, Chairman Rockefeller. It's an issue that we'd like to see, I think, get some attention this year. I think there has been sort of the usual political squandering around sort of the executive order implementation, but I think the bigger deal that people just want to hear is, why does the issue matter to you? Like, why do you care about oceans? Where are you from? Why is it an important part of your background? That's really the most important message that your members could get, because at the end of the week, the member usually isn't going to remember whatever little policy fix that you might have suggested. They're going to remember, okay, I had 20 meetings this week with constituents. 4 of them were on ocean and coastal issues. I clearly need to start worrying more about ocean and coastal issues. And if the member doesn't have a game plan, even if it can be just that simple of thinking, well, I got to do more. I got to think about what I'm going to do. So I encourage you just to have a conversation with a staffer that you meet with. Ask them a little bit about his or her background. Find out anything you've got in common, and just try to treat it as a conversation. They won't be expecting you to know every single word of every single bill. They don't know every single word of every single bill. I know a lot less now as a Hill staffer than I think I thought I did when I was a lobbyist on these issues. And I'm always finding something else out. But my number one value that I get out of meeting with people is just learning a little bit about why they care about an issue, like what brought them to the issue, why is it important. That's what really helps me make the case to Chairman Rockefeller that he really needs to focus on something. Sometimes also it's a matter of trying to not allow bad things from happening. And that is a position that I think my boss finds himself in too regularly. The value of the Senate during a difficult political environment is that it can stop bad things from happening. And he, as one who does not have a coastline himself, is often still mindful, though, of the value that oceans and coasts bring to the nation. His family cares very personally about ocean issues. They've dedicated several parks in the past, and he has his own sort of special passions. We jokingly said about 3 weeks ago, Chairman Rockefeller, literally in the middle of the night, started writing emails saying that he had just read about a AAAS study describing the loss of large predator fish, and he didn't understand the issue. He wanted to know more. He wanted to know why. He wanted to know what the causes were, and he wanted to know what we could do about it. And it literally was as simple as his saying, I hate to think of living in a world full of only minnows. We have to be able to do something about this. So, go ahead.
We had a question here with regard to shoreline issues. Would that
Oh, that's a great point. In fact, that's often a question you can feel free and comfortable to ask, as you're in a meeting. Just say, if you feel like it, just say, I'm not familiar with these issues. Tell me where I should go with this concern. It can be a mix. The Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over ocean policy generally, as well as over coastal zone management. We also have oversight over NOAA and the Coast Guard. However, we work very closely with EPW on a lot of coastal restoration issues. For those of you, for example, who maybe have a Fish and Wildlife Service like National Wildlife Refuge, EPW has jurisdiction over the Fish and Wildlife Service.
No, I know. I just
bad acronym.
Environmental and Public Works.
Do you guys have a fine jar for when people use the acronyms?
We're going to go downstairs and buy a book.
There you go. Sorry about that. Yeah, Environment Public Works. And a lot of times it can just be a matter of just asking that question. Depends on what it is. They also have jurisdiction over Clean Water Act issues.
Issues of agriculture, runoff, and industrial wastes. Give us any advice about those issues currently?
Sure, that's a good one. Well, that's a broad issue. There is a lot going on right now, I think, between the Agriculture Committee and Environment on dealing with some pesticide issues. Probably worth the question. Because Commerce doesn't have a lot on the pollution side of it, except for the oil spill stuff, which we do, I haven't been focused as closely on it. We've been thinking, though, for example, about doing a reauthorization of the Coastal Zone Management Act bill, and that has at least some provisions that could help be brought to bear for polluted runoff. I would suggest asking about it just in a personal way. Just say, to whoever you meet with to say, are you finding these challenges in your district? What types of actions are you taking to address those? And they may give you some ideas about ways that they think have merit in this Congress, that they think they can move ahead. I've seen a few somewhat like regional specific bills, like there's a Chesapeake Bay restoration effort still underfoot. A lot of the Gulf restoration efforts, I think if we do see funding diverted from the penalties towards Gulf restoration, I think that's a great opportunity to divert funding towards improved polluted runoff issues. But I probably would suggest just asking some questions about it.
Is the Energy Committee, how does that interface with some of their offshore oil?
Oh, that's a great question. The Energy and Natural Resource Committee, this suddenly starts sounding really convoluted, doesn't it? They have jurisdiction over sort of the operations of the oil and gas sort of efforts, as well as just energy production on outer continental shelf lands. So in theory, you kind of think, well, Commerce does ocean policy generally. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts, really, of how they operate, the Energy and Natural Resources Committee is really where a lot of the action's happening on energy policy. Commerce and Energy Committee works really closely with them if we're trying to think through on, what's a broader energy policy that really makes sense offshore. Usually our members chime in sort of from the perspective of saying, well, I don't know, I'm a little concerned about that oil rig because I have a really strong fishery right in that same area. I think Commerce members tend to have sort of the broader, maybe comprehensive sort of sense of the ocean issues. But energy is really where there's a lot of efforts going on right now, I think, to think through what are the right reforms for mineral management service as well as for the offshore oil and gas industry.
You're starting to get a picture of why Congress is really slow to act after this bill. It seems like such a big deal. It's like every one of these little things is a different
Yeah. Great.
Can you just tell me where protection of sharks stands with
Sure.
coastal waters?
Did we get the shark finning bill?
That's shark bill last year.
Let's try it on.
Sadly, though, it's not quite as good as we'd like it to be.
Yes. That bill,
We did pass a bill that sort of tightened up some of the enforcement mechanisms for when they engage in shark finning.
Yeah.
Not as much as we would have liked. We would have liked to see a stronger bill.
It's just sort of no shark finning, but still you can catch sharks.
it bans the practice of shark finning in U.S. waters. And that gives us some much stronger standing for our international negotiations as well. If we go into international negotiations, if they see it as something that we do in our country, then what are we going to say to people who actually do it on a regular basis? So it was a strong step, but it basically provided our resource managers another tool in their toolbox.
A second thought that we may soon be able to do is we will be reintroducing legislation. It's an international fisheries law just meant to try to combat illegal fishing. It's a Senator Inouye bill that we expect to probably move at the next markup as well. Actually, I guess we have it marked up, but that's a bill that we've done enough work, I think, in terms of negotiating between the House and Senate that we really think we might have a shot at getting that one passed. I should know it. I don't have it, but I'll tell you what, I'll send.
It's the International Fisheries Stewardship and Enforcement Act is the official title.
If it's easier, you can pronounce it IFC bill. I don't know if that helps. In the
And do you have any plans for more MPAs? Is that on the burner at all, or are people talking about other
well, let's see. The current ones that are on my radar, we've been working on you've probably seen it before. Senator Boxer has a great bill. It's a bill to reauthorize and sort of widen the boundaries of the Gulf of Farallones and Channel Islands sort of marine sanctuaries, or Cordell Banks marine sanctuaries. So we would like to see that marine sanctuary broadened to include much more protected areas. We expect that legislation to be considered by the full committee at our next markup, which is now June 8th. It's a bill that actually has previously passed through our committee, has had challenges on the Senate floor. This year, I think the interesting challenge will be that Senator Boxer very appropriately has acknowledged that you shouldn't have oil and gas drilling in the sanctuary. The fact that she put that one line in the bill to reinforce what every Californian already knows and breathes and lives has proved offensive to some of our House Republican colleagues. And so I would expect that to be a fight that we continue to have, regardless of the fact that California has already pretty resoundingly answered that question, that they don't want to have oil and gas drilling, much less in the marine sanctuary. So we'll see. It's not been a problem in our committee. We expect it to be reported out favorably. We've got the votes, and we'll see how it goes from there.
The marine sanctuaries haven't been able to designate any new sites because of the language in the old authorization. Is that something that's going to be looked at within the next couple of years, reauthorizing the act to allow a little bit of options for expansion?
We would like to. That's on my short list. I'm just so offended by the provision in the House language. It's one that we expect to try to introduce the bill in the Senate. I don't have the sense that it's something we can fix, because I think the House is pretty committed to that position, and so I don't see that changing this Congress. But our goal in thinking about the issue is, well, let's put out the bill that we'd like to see happen. Even if we know it can't happen in the next 6 months, let's put it out there so people can start talking about a good idea. I think Senator Whitehouse, for example, has done a really good example of that with the National Endowment for the Oceans Act. You know, that bill's been moving around in different forms and functions, for probably 10 years. But Senator Whitehouse has done a wonderful job, I think, of really shaping the bill. His staff have done an excellent job of getting co-sponsors, trying to lay the groundwork. I don't see that probably as something that can survive the House, maybe this session, but we think, frankly, it's the most thoughtful legislative proposal out there to create the type of fund that we think might be a long-term approach to some of the ocean and coastal challenges. So it's a good start.
Any bills specific to education that are related to conservation, marine policy, or just species diversity, anything like that you
There, two, actually, in particular. Last Congress, the Commerce Committee was able to pass a bill called America Competes, which was a law more or less to try to get funding at some of the science and engineering and innovation. Separately, Congresswoman Lois Capps in the House has a bill that would both authorize and then make a little bit more explicit an environmental education program within NOAA called BWET. And I confess, I don't even think I know what the acronym stands for. Does someone else?
Yeah, it's been around, but they've been advanced for years.
Yeah. In the Senate, we had some challenges getting the language that was just as specific as what she was able to accomplish in the House last session. So in the America Competes provision, we included sort of a broader authorization for no education programs that we think would at least allow, the authorization to continue. Having gone to a couple of schools that have BWET programs, I admit it's a great program, and I think we'd like to see something like that happen.
Is that congressionally earmarked money for specific states, though?
It's a mix of both. It's a great question. The program is more or less an authorization saying, NOAA can do this, and so it allows sort of a broad ability for states to do it. Where you've seen probably the most success and sort of funding going toward it is where specific members have said, within that program, I would like, this amount of money to be available to my area to do it. And so that's happened in California, Hawaii, I believe in some areas of the Northeast as well. Oh, did it? Oh, so that's good.
Coral cover in the Florida Keys and Caribbean Basin has decreased from 80 to 90% in the past 30 years. And there's a lot of water flow coming out of the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico with the lead current.
Absolutely.
So any kind of bloom or oil disturbance there affects the quality of the water going across the reefs. Is there anything we can do to help protect and restore our coral reefs?
Oh, that's a great question. Coral reefs are also near and dear to my boss's heart as well as my own. There's a few things that we're working on right now. I think my sense is the biggest thing, frankly, is we got to come up with a climate policy at some time. We have to think of a way to reduce the carbon going into the ocean. So the sooner we can figure that out, I think that will help everything, including corals. There's a couple of other initiatives, though, that we're working on that I think could help. One is a reauthorization of there's a coral reef sort of program. It's a bill that we've really tried hard to get through the Senate in the last few sessions, but it authorizes quite a significant amount of money per year. It's about 60 to 80 million, depending upon the year, to get at sort of the threats and harms to coral reefs ecosystems, and to authorize fundings at different, both federal programs as well as states and local community grants. That one we actually just marked up in committee. Again, it was reported without any opposition. I think it'll be a challenge in the Senate just because it authorizes funding. So I think just raising the issue as an important one is helpful. In my mind, the reason we can't get that done is we need actually Republicans that are very strong advocates on it. Senator Snowe, for example, is a phenomenal advocate on our committee that we rely heavily on a regular basis. I think in the House, we've recently seen the departure or retirement of some phenomenal Republicans that really had been great ocean champions. Wayne Gilchrist from Maryland, Jim Saxon. They were in a position to really do things about the issues they cared about, and they cared about ocean and coastal issues. So I think, and I've been struggling thinking, God, we need a few more Republicans who really care about ocean issues in the House, and that helps a lot. Lemieux, actually, who had been a senator for a brief amount of time, was the first issue he raised with me once in a meeting, of just saying, you know, I grew up swimming in these corals. They're increasingly decimated. We've had 3 particularly bad years. You know, what can we do? It was one of the reasons he actually had been actively, I think, really concerned in debating the climate bill last session. Rubio, I think, is one that we're interested in learning more about. So I think proving to him, you know, the tourism base and the importance of the corals to the tourism in Florida, it's worth the education.
Catherine, you bring up a good point, which is there's lots of good things that come out of the committee that are supported by staff, even on both sides of the aisle by staff, but then they don't go anywhere. The people that are here, although some of them have DC presences, are largely regionally based, either multiple districts on the House side or even multiple states, but usually not, you know, the entire nation.
Sure. Which
means that they have trouble oftentimes interfacing with committees so that you understand how we can do this linkage.
But
what's your recommendation on a sort of a path forward so that when you get things through, that you say, you know, clearly, this went through with no opposition, but you're having trouble getting it to the floor.
Sure, that's a great
point. How can we work this so that we can bring more members together?
That's a great point.
What's your preferred interface? How do you want to do this?
Two things. One, don't hesitate to call committee staff. We didn't know about this meeting until, from my wonderful Sea Grant fellow, Katie, mentioned it late in the day at 4 o'clock on Friday. And I'm closing in a house today, so I'm thrilled to be here. I hadn't planned to be here, but I came in specifically because I think this is an important part of my job. You know, we're supposed to pay attention to what members care about. It's actually the thing that surprises me most about coming to the Hill. I'd been a lobbyist for like 12 years, and the thing that surprised me the most is how few calls I actually get, even from folks who are registered lobbyists. And I think that's your job. You should be calling me every week. But at any rate, so don't hesitate to call people who you think might be able to have an answer for you. And if they don't hesitate to go back in like a week or two and just say, hey, just want to remind you that I've emailed you, you know, with this question. That's different in my mind than blast faxing one office with 800 emails all saying the exact same, you know, 2-sentence thing of like, pass this bill. And I think just a thoughtful approach of just calling people who you think can help you or at least get your information, that's why members are here, and that's why senators are here, and that's why their staff is here. They're supposed to be responsive to constituents. So feel free to call. The second part is ask around. Sometimes the reason a bill isn't happening, you have to do a little bit of a dance to find out exactly why it's not happening. We've had challenges in the Senate doing anything that's a new authorization because, you know, it runs into challenges for the funding situation. I've seen members get over that when they go to the members with the concern and they've had a personal conversation. Senator Levin, for example, he would like to expand the boundaries of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. That's a bill that it isn't meant to come with added funding, but because he's doubling the boundaries of the sanctuary, you know, NOAA has said, well, that'll cost us, you know, an additional $1 million or so. So that one mild amount of, you know, $1 million isn't that much from a federal budget perspective, but it's raised opposition. So there's one senator in particular who's always had a hold on the bill. So just last week, Senator Levin said, you don't really stick with this guy holding up my bill. So he scheduled 3 meetings with that person to say, you know, you need to understand the economic tourism base of my area that would be really assisted by this one bill. You know, I think this is a real win. And it sounds like they've already made some progress just by having that specific conversation. So I would suggest just follow up after something comes out of committee. Just ask the person who sponsored the bill, say, what do you see as the next steps? What do you see as the obstacles? Who's standing in your way? And then, you know, circle back, try to think through of how perhaps you could help. If a person is really committed to getting their bill through, they'll definitely appreciate calls like that. You know, they'll really want to work with you. And it may be that writing a letter of support or contacting another ocean champion in another state who may be able to help. You know, those could be ways to track it through the day. We find most regularly that the biggest thing, I think, that holds up a bill is a member just letting it either slip through the cracks or not maybe doing that extra legwork or just maybe not having fully exhausted all the remedies. So if someone says, you know, hey, so-and-so has a problem with it, then that's when you have to get creative if you want to get things through this session. The other side that I think is different for us this year than previous Congress is we still really don't know how to probably work with the House because it's such a different body than it was even last session. There are so many new members, and I think a lot of them are really just trying to get a sense of why they're here, if they plan to run again, are they here just to philosophize? You know, we're just not sure. So I think in part that you'll be in a better position even than most Hill staff to just move around, just develop relationships, try to encourage new members to care about issues that matter to their constituents and so on.
Well, typically this is a one-way dialogue where we come and bug you. But I certainly through the Blue Frontier campaign, which is the umbrella group that brought this coalition together and does so on a fairly regular basis, to be a resource for you, to go to David Helvarg, and he'll source it out to this broader community for times that you need help. Because oftentimes it comes at weird times. It's very inside baseball, and that it's very difficult for them to understand when to give you the call so that you can then ask them. But we'd like you to be proactive as well, and I think this community is willing to help work both sides of the hill and work bipartisan and do this. But they need a little help in terms of where those soft spots are. And like I say, I know sometimes they come up at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night or something. That the nice thing is I think we're willing to be that reactive.
Sure. Thank you.
In short, what he's saying is we're good tippers and measures. So just let us know when you need.
Senate needs a lot of those these days.
The oil spill commission report, we need legislation for that. Are you aware of any potential sponsors for that?
Actually, yes, so, sort of. The commission report in its entirety, I'll admit I don't know. Before the oil commission report, though, my boss introduced and passed legislation with Senator Snowe called the SHORE Act, and it included several of the recommendations that the commission later put out. It isn't the full picture. I don't mean to say that one bill solves everybody's problems, because I think there's important pieces in other committees as well. But one thing that bill would do is it would increase the role that NOAA and Coast Guard should be playing in advance of any offshore oil and gas drilling. In theory, agencies are supposed to talk to each other, through NEPA and come up with some idea of what they're doing before they do it. I think that disaster demonstrated we don't do that as well as we need to on offshore oil and gas. He believes strongly that we need to figure out a better way for NOAA and the Department of Interior to be working together in advance to have the science that would support decisions, including whether or not drilling makes sense. As well, he also thinks, well, we need to obviously demonstrate we've got the response capacity, which we don't have in the Arctic, and we know that now. So he's been trying to think through how would you get there. So that's one legislative piece.
Excuse me, is there money in the research on things like dispersants?
It's a good question. In the last version of it, last Congress, there was some. There wasn't enough, frankly. It pulled funding from the Liability Trust Fund, so it was about, I think, about $45 million. We will be working with EPW. I'm going to backtrack. Someone mentioned Senator Vitter, I believe, earlier. Not the person necessarily you usually want to go to for oil and gas drilling. However, I have to give him credit because he actually was the first person to have the very smart idea that funding from the penalties from the Gulf Shore disaster should be channeled to pay for restoration in the Gulf. So go Senator Vitter. You have to take my hat off on that one. It has been reintroduced this session in 2 other legislative vehicles. You're going to soon see 2 more legislative vehicles. Chairman Rockefeller is going to reintroduce the exact same bill that Senator Vitter had and have it come back to Commerce so that we have a shot at trying to steer funding towards coastal restoration. There's some other good ideas out there. Senator Landrieu has one, Senator Vitter has one, Senator Nelson has one. So I think it'll be an area where people are trying to do some good work this session. So now that I've totally exhausted all of you.
How do we contact those of you?
I can get my information to you guys if you want to send it out to folks. All right, well, actually, I can just give you my name. It's Catherine, CATHERINE, _, and it's Hazelwood, but it's spelled a little differently. It's not the guy who drove the Exxon Valdez into the coast of Alaska. It's HAZLEWOOD at commerce.senate.gov. And our offices are in 420, the Hart Building, our ocean offices. What's that? Anyone who has dog allergies, though, I just need to warn you, there's a very large golden retriever, mine, who regularly hangs out in our office. So just let us know if you're coming in advance and we'll leave him home.
Catherine, obviously widely knowledgeable. Your particular portfolio within the committee is?
Ocean policy, generally. I focus most of my time on either ocean policy issues or NOAA oversight. I have a co-counsel who handles our Coast Guard sort of environmental issues. You can just feel free to contact either me or contact Katie, our great Sea Grant fellow, and we'll put you in touch with the right person on the subcommittee.
Excuse me.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Catherine, CATHERINE, _ Hazelwood, HAZLEWOOD at commerce.senate.gov.
Can you just give us more of the political perspective on how people are thinking about the national ocean policy from your perspective?
That's a great question. I think people aren't thinking much about it, frankly. I find that people have not heard enough. I think there's a real need for education. And it's my opinion, and we've actually had this conversation with the administration, that I sometimes think the administration hasn't done a great job of explaining what it is and what it isn't. So I think, frankly, just explaining whatever you think is the most tangible way that you envision it happening in your area, or why it would make sense for your area, is a really much needed message. Before I even came to the Hill, I remember my then organization, I worked for the Nature Conservancy, and they asked me to try to get funding for marine spatial planning. And I just remember, like, I felt like I was sucking wind up there on the Hill. No one knew what it was. They weren't impressed with what was going on. They said, God, it just kind of sounds like data stuff and management. And they had a hard time making it feel more tangible. These days, I think it also can sometimes make people think that immediately they're going to make decisions on ocean uses. Or I think just really having that conversation with them about what marine spatial planning is, if you have some successful examples that you want to talk to them about, just showing them that there are some positive examples out there, I think would help. Because frankly, I have found that even on my committee, I don't currently think I have any members who are really willing to fight for that in the current budget climate. They're really nervous, just reductions everywhere, so they get things like fishery stock assessments, and they get things like coastal zone management. I don't think they yet feel like they understand what's going on with marine spatial planning. So they're loath to go to bat for it in a typical funding scenario. So trying to make it a little more tangible to them, I think, would be really helpful. Actually, do you have any ideas on that?
I think, particularly with marine spatial planning, I think that's a conversation that's going to need to be driven by constituents who come up, who develop an understanding among themselves what marine spatial planning is and what it isn't. You get tremendous pushback from a community like the fishing community, where they look at marine spatial planning as a bunch of boxes on the map where they're not going to be allowed to fish anymore. And that's not what it is. That's not what it's intended to do. It's intended to, of course, be a more holistic approach to the use of ocean space. But because everybody's first reaction is fear, their first reaction is opposition, and that's what the members tend to hear from their constituents. So until that conversation changes at sort of a grassroots level, and the members start to hear things from their constituents that are more about the benefits of marine spatial planning, maybe when the offshore wind folks, for example, come in to talk about marine spatial planning, it's a very different conversation from when the fishing industry comes in to talk about it. But really, they're talking about the same thing. They're just talking about it from two different perspectives, and one is thinking of it as a great benefit that's going to be the jetpack on the offshore wind industry, and the other one is afraid of exactly that happening, and neither is really the truth. So, until that conversation, comes a little more full circle and gets built back up to the member level, it's going to be tough to make that case because there's so much misinformation and, frankly, confusion, more so almost than misinformation about what it's.
Here's some data coming back from Dry Tortugas Observe that the fish stocks are increasing throughout.
That example is one that I've heard people come in and explain that story, and I think it really resonates. I mean, marine protected areas work, and yet I think the Hill tends to just get sort of the PR perception of like, oh, they're controversial, I should be concerned. But I do think actually going in and just showing any of those signs of success, it really matters. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself when you suddenly have a place that is growing, one of the biggest resources for the state, like you want to maximize that success and potentially replicate it elsewhere. I do remember how long Tortugas took to actually designate, so maybe we could speed it up.
I know one of the things is we come up with new great ideas and things that we should be doing. Part of the pressure the committee staff gets is where am I going to find the money? What's going to get the axe? You don't get a lot of input back from the real world about things that are dysfunctional and where that wiggle room might be.
Thank you.
So
great
I think
example.
one of the great things is this community is you're so much closer to the resource and you're so much closer to federal programs and state programs and grant programs to be able to articulate where some of that wiggle room might be, because there are programs that are clearly eating up overhead where that you've been frustrated with for years.
That's a fantastic
that may be the
point.
1-2 punch that we need, which is to say, I need this new great initiative, and this is where you might find it, because otherwise you're working in the dark a lot, I think, on where to cut.
True, in the sense, every time the agencies come in to tell us what's going on, you'd think everything's going really, really well. So we really do rely very significantly on people with the actual experience to tell us what programs work for them, which ones don't. It's also a directive that Chairman Rockefeller gave us. You know, he frankly is in a position where he wants to support everything. He thinks the current deficit conscious very little about, you know, the discretionary spending, and he's been frustrated, so he's happy to fight for funding. The catch, though, is he's asked, like, what can go, or what's not working well? Where should we be cutting, if anywhere? And so that perspective would be really well received, I think, because generally speaking, I think most people this time of year on the Hill, people come in and they ask for a lot of things that staff probably won't be able to do. So something like that, frankly, is a service to the Hill, just saying, hey, I just want to share with you my challenges with this program. If you're making tough choices, this is one where I think it's just not worth its investment. This would be a better one. I think that's really helpful advice. We'll be sitting down with appropriation staff, you know, in the coming month to talk through like what issues our members are trying to go to bat for, and which issues they are comfortable letting go. And so I think both of those things of what you support and what you're less enthusiastic about are really welcome pieces of advice.